It was 1835, a year before the revolution that would define our destiny. In those days, I still believed that diplomacy could resolve all conflicts on the Texan border. What words well chosen and carefully written were enough to maintain peace between cultures as different as ours and that of the native peoples who had inhabited these lands for generations, as I was wrong. My mission in those days was delicate, negotiating non-aggression agreements with the Cherokee tribes that had settled in East Texas after being expelled from their ancestral lands in the Southeast. They were displaced people, like many of us, trying to find a new home in a land that promised freedom, but charged a loud price for it. The meeting was scheduled to take place near Nacogdoches, in a neutral place that both Cherokee and Texas settlers considered it safe. It was a region of soft hills covered by dense pine and oak forests, cut by crystalline streams that serpented among the trees like silver veins. I rode there with only 2 assistants and an interpreter, a deliberate demonstration of good faith. We wanted to show that we saw in peace not as conquerors but as neighbors willing to share the earth. The Cherokee camp was located in a natural clearing, surrounded by old trees whose trunks were so wide that 3 men with arms data could not embrace them. His leather tents formed a perfect circle around a central fire, following traditions that preceded our arrival at this continent for centuries. Chief Bowl, the leader of the Texan Cherokee, welcomed me with the formal courtesy that characterized his people. He was a man in 60 years, gray hair braided with wooden beads, eyes that had seen a lot of suffering but still kept the dignity of those who have never completely bent in the face of adversity. "General Houston," he said in carefully pronounced English, "you come in time of change. The wind brings war news. Your people are preparing to fight Mexicans." "It's true," I admitted, "but that doesn't have to affect our agreements. Texas, free or not, will always respect treaties made with the Cherokee people." He nodded slowly, but I noticed a shadow of doubt in his eyes. "Words are like leaves in the wind, General, easily charged away when the storm arrives." We spent 2 days negotiating the terms of the treaty. Borders, hunting rights, trade between our peoples, every detail has been carefully discussed and agreed. But it was at the end of the 2nd day that the shaman appeared. I had noticed him from my arrival, an elderly man who always remained at the edges of the camp, silently observing our negotiations. Her white hair fell to the shoulders and her eyes had that penetrating quality that only the very old or very wise ones have. Chief Bowl introduced me. "This is Stark Eagle, our memories carrier. He keeps the old stories of our people." The shaman approached slowly, backed by a staff carved with symbols that I did not recognize. When he spoke, it was in Cherokee, with a hoarse voice like the wind passing between stones. The interpreter translated his words but hesitated several times, as if some things were difficult to express in English. "He says you are an honorable man, General Houston, but warns that there are places in these lands where honor offers no protection." "What places?" I asked, more for courtesy than for real interest. Screaming Eagle gestured north in the direction where we had come. His words flowed into a torrent of Cherokee, occasionally punctuated by dramatic breaks. The interpreter struggled to accompany. "He speaks from a region to 15 miles north here. He says that that land was stained for something that happened long before our people arrive here, even before the Spaniards. Something old and furious that was never purified." Screaming Eagle continued, his gestures becoming more emphatic. The central camp of the camp seemed to burn lower as he spoke, as if his words had power over his flames. "He says that region is, as you would say, cursed. What a furious spirits inhabit those forests, arrested for ancient injustice. He says wise men, both Cherokee and white, avoid that place, especially during storms." "Why during storms?" I asked, my curiosity aroused despite my skepticism. The shaman looked at me straight in the eyes for the first time. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, lower, more urgent. He says that the storm arouses what sleeps. May the rain wash the veil that keeps the dead separated from the living, and that those spirits, they do not distinguish between Cherokee and white man. They see only intruders in their cursed land. I respectfully thanked I for the warning, but I must admit that I didn't take your words very seriously. As an educated man in the 19th century, created with Christian values and Enlightenment rationalism, stories of spirits and curses seem to me primitive superstitions. Interesting from the anthropological point of view, perhaps, but not something that a civilized man should fear. Say the screaming eagle that I appreciate your concern, he told the interpreter. But I have businesses in Nacogdoches that can take me on many different routes. I can't promise to avoid an entire region based on old legends. The shaman shook his head sadly when he heard the translation. He said something brief in Cherokee, then walked away to the shadows at the limit of the camp. What did he say? I asked. The interpreter hesitated. He said, "Pride comes before the fall, even for honorable men." 24 years have passed. It was December 1859, during my second term as governor. The years had taught me many lessons about humility, the boundaries of what a man can control through willpower and determination. He had survived wars, politics, personal scandals, victories and losses. The young, confident general who had negotiated with the Cherokee had become an older man and hope, wiser, but apparently not wise enough to remind me of the screaming eagle. Warning. I was returning from a political meeting in Marshall to Austin, a journey of several days on horseback through the heart of East Texas. It was winter, but the weather had been surprisingly mild for the time of year. Clean sky, pleasant temperatures, roads in good condition. Everything changed on the afternoon of the third day. Dark clouds accumulated on the west horizon with alarming speed. The wind changed direction and intensity, bringing with it the distinctive smell of heavy rain approaching. My horse, a bay named Thunder, began to show nervousness, his ears moving constantly, capturing sounds that my human ears could not distinguish. I consulted my map and realized that it was close to that region that Screaming Eagle had mentioned, decades before. The memory suddenly emerged, clear as if the conversation had happened yesterday. 15 miles north of Nacogdoches, he had said, especially during storms. I looked at the quickly approached clouds. Distant thunder echoed through trees as war drums. I had two options: trying to circumvent the region, adding hours to my journey, and possibly being caught by the open field storm, or directly crossing those alleged cursed lands and seeking shelter on the other side. My practical nature has won my sleeping superstitions. I decided to ride directly through the region. It was a decision that would haunt me for the following years. The storm reached me exactly when I entered the area that Screaming Eagle had described. It was not a gradual transition. One moment I was riding under heavy but dry clouds, and next time was being bombarded by rain so intense that I could barely see the trail in front of me. Rays cut the sky, often alarming, each flash illuminating the landscape around in ghostly details. Thunder was clearly terrified. The horse that had carried me through numerous battles, which had never shown fear of cannons or musks, was now shaking under my saddle. His nostrils constantly dilated as if captured smells that terrified him. The surrounding forest had a different quality from the others we had crossed. The trees looked older, denser, their branches intertwined as skeletal, fingers trying to block the sky. Even with the torrential rain, there was a disturbing underlying silence. No bird sound, no noise of small animals moving between the vegetation. Just the noise of the rain, the wind, and the thunder's hooves in the crescent mud. That's when I heard the first scream. Initially, I thought it was only the wind passing through the trees, unusual. But as I continued riding, the sound was repeated, a sharp and prolonged lament that was clearly not natural. It came from all directions at the same time, as if the forest itself was moaning. Thunder stopped completely, refusing to take another step. As much as I tried to encourage him, the horse remained motionless, shaking violently. His ears were completely erect, constantly spinning as if he tried to locate the source of multiple threatening sounds. I dismantled and tried to pull him by the reins, but it was useless. The animal was paralyzed with terror. It was then that I saw the first figures. Among the trunks of the trees, intermittently illuminated by the rays, human forms began to materialize. Not suddenly, but gradual, as if they were emerging from the wood itself. At first, only indistinct silhouettes. Then details began to define themselves. They were Native American, but of no tribe I knew. His clothes and ornaments seemed much older than anything I had seen during my negotiations with Cherokee, Comanche, or Apache. Elaborate feathers, complex body paintings, stone weapons and bone instead of metal. But the most disturbing was his condition. All of them displayed terrible injuries. Spear wounds crossing breasts, torn scale, mutilated limbs. And they all watched me with eyes that burned with an ancestral fury. They didn't move like living people. His feet did not touch the wet floor. They floated between the trees like fog, slowly approaching where I was stopped with my terrified horse. One of them, apparently the leader, stood out from the group. He was a tall man with an eagle, elaborated hit that stretched to the ground. His face was painted with symbols of war that pulsed with his own light, regardless of the rays that cut the sky. When he spoke, his voice echoed not only through the air but apparently through time, carrying the weight of centuries of unresolved injustice. "White man," he said in perfect English, although his mouth didn't seem to move in sync with the words. "You walk on holy, spotted, sacred land." "I have no intention of desecrating anything," I said, trying to keep my voice firm despite the terror that grew in my chest. "I'm just trying to find a storm shelter." "The storm is ours," he said. "We call the rain to wash the floor where our people have been massacred. We call the wind to carry our laments. We call the rays to illuminate the injustice that cries out of revenge." More figures emerged from the trees. Men, women, children, all displaying deadly injuries, all looking at me with that same supernatural fury. I began to understand that I had stumbled at the site of some old massacre, where an entire tribe had been annihilated. "What happened here?" I asked, although a part of me didn't want to know the answer. The leader gestured to the forest around. As he moved, the landscape began to change. The trees became translucent, revealing a vision of the past. I saw a prosperous, native village, leather tents, family bonfires, children playing, women working, men returning from hunting. Then I saw the arrival of the conquerors. No Texans or Americans, but Spanish in metal armor mounted on horses, carrying primitive firearms. I saw the betrayal, the apparent peaceful negotiation that turned into ambush. I saw the following massacre. Men killed as they tried to protect their families. Women and children slaughtered without mercy, the whole village annihilated in a matter of hours. And then, which was perhaps worse, the bodies left inserted, denying souls the proper rest that their traditions demanded. "This happened over 300 years ago," said the spiritual leader. "Our bones still lay on this earth mixed with the mud. Our spirits still cry out for justice that never came." "I was not responsible for that," he said, although the words sounded empty for me. "This happened centuries before I was born, but you represent those who came later," he replied. "Those who benefited from our destruction, those who built their lives on our ashes without ever recognizing our suffering." The spectral figures began to get closer. I could feel a supernatural coldness emanating from them as if they absorbed all the warmth around the air. Thunder was now lying on the floor, completely prostrate with terror. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Recognition," said the leader. "Testimony that someone with power and influence finally admits that an injustice has been committed here, that our deaths were not forgotten." "What if I do that? If I recognize what happened here? So maybe we can finally rest, and maybe you can start from this cursed earth before our fury completely consumes your sanity." I looked around to the dozens of spirits around me. Each face told a story of terror and suffering. Each injury shouted for justice that had been denied for centuries. I realized that I was facing something much larger than my own safety or comfort. It was facing the historical responsibility that all leaders eventually face, the need to recognize and try to remedy the injustices of the past, even when we were not directly responsible for them. "I recognize," he said aloud, trying to project my voice through the storm. I recognized that a terrible injustice was committed here, that innocent people were massacred, that you deserved better luck. They deserved to be remembered. The spiritual leader studied me for a long moment. And what will you do with this recognition? Sam Houston, words are only wind if they are not followed by actions. I promise that when I return to Austin, I will research the story of this place. I will ensure that it is properly documented, and I will make a memorial erected to honor his memory. Would you do that? Even knowing many wondering why a Texan governor would honor natives killed centuries ago? I would do, I answered without hesitation. Because justice has no expiration date, and because learning from past mistakes is the only way to avoid repeating them in the future. Something in the atmosphere has changed. Rain began to decrease in intensity. The rays became less frequent, and the spectral figures began to lose their threatening quality. Screaming Eagle told us about you, said the leader, a note of approval appearing in his voice. He said he was a man who could learn, who could grow beyond his own prejudices. Staunch Eagle is still alive? I asked, surprised. Not in the living world, but he watches over these lands, helping to keep the bridge among the worlds. It was he who convinced us to give him a chance to prove his integrity rather than simply punish him for his intrusion. The spectral figures began to dissipate as smoke being dispersed by the wind, but before leaving completely, the leader approached again. Remember your promise, Sam Houston, and also remember that some wounds are so deep that they take generations to heal, but the first step is always recognition. I will remember, I promised. And one last thing. When you tell this story, and you should tell it, make sure people understand that not every curse is malevolent. Sometimes it's just the way the earth finds to keep the memory of those who were forgotten alive. With these words, he disappeared along with the others. The storm dissipated quickly, leaving only the soft sound of the rain decreasing and the leaf drip. Thunder got up slowly, still nervous, but no longer paralyzed of terror. I set up again and continued my journey, but I knew it had been permanently changed by the experience, not only by the supernatural encounter in itself, but for the lesson he had taught me about historical responsibility and the importance of giving voice to those who were silenced. I fulfilled my promise. When I returned to Austin, I started research on the history of that region. I discovered Spanish records that confirmed the massacre of a native village in the place, just as the spirits had shown. I ordered a discreet memorial to be erected, and to ensure that the story was documented in the state's official archives. Many questioned my decision, how the spiritual leader had predicted, but I knew I had done the right thing. Some injustices are too big to ignore, even when they are too old to be corrected, and whenever I pass by East Texas, I am careful to avoid that region during storms, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because some lands are sacred, and some memories are too important to be disturbed unnecessarily. East Texas's Cherokee curse has taught me that true leadership sometimes requires that we face past ghosts, literal or metaphorical. That real progress can only be built on a historical honesty foundation, not on the convenient oblivion of past injustices. If meetings like this, which reveal the hidden layers of history that shaped our land, arouse their curiosity over the mysteries still buried in our borders, consider subscribing to this channel. There is much more to find out about the truths that were buried, but never truly forgotten. Because sometimes the dead have the most important lessons to teach the living. And sometimes recognizing this is the first step to finally finding peace, both for them and us.